Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Michael Finney. Today I am joined by David W. Berner. Would you like to say hello, sir?
Yes, I would. Hello. Thanks for having me here, Michael. I appreciate that.
So let's get into a little bit of your background, who you are, where you're from, where you are now, anything.
Well, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, Southwestern Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh, just outside of Pittsburgh. I came to the Chicago area in 1988. I had been in broadcast journalism in Pittsburgh for a long time. After I left college and my undergrad, at least, came to Chicago in '88 for a position here, a radio position, which I fully embraced and loved, and glad I came to Chicago, raised my kids here. I love Chicago, and it's really my home now. But I have a great affinity for Pittsburgh too. It's a town that, not unlike Detroit, came out of the ashes and rediscovered itself, reinvented itself, and it's quite a place. It's not what people think. It's not its old image. So I come from there. I have a lot of that. I like to say that I have steel and oil and coal in my blood from that area, and kind of the sound of the working man sensibility. And I came here in radio, and I worked in radio for a long time, did radio journalism for a long time, did some stuff for NPR, did some stuff for CBS Radio, and then started teaching college and became a full-time professor and associate professor later in life, tenured. And I did that for 18 years while I still worked in broadcasting, and I still do today a little bit. But mainly my work, my efforts, my energy goes toward writing. First book was written back when I was in my 40s, and I've written over a dozen books now. And it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality, I hope. But I tend to write fast, and I think that comes from my broadcast background. It's like, what have you done for me lately? In the last 5 minutes even. So I tend to be a fast writer, a very slow editor, but a fast writer. And that's what I do now, and that's what I love. And I've written memoir and fiction, and some of it, gratefully, has been awarded prizes and recognized in some way. I appreciate that very much. Just was at Printers Row Lit Fest in Chicago the other day, and it's great to talk to readers who come by and have either read my books or maybe are buying another one. And it's great to talk to them. I've done book clubs before, which is so much fun when they read my book and I get to be there. So that's what I do now. I've got a poetry collection coming out later this year. And that's my first poetry collection. I'm very proud of it and had a lot of help pulling that together. So that's kind of a synopsis of where I am. I live in the western suburbs of Chicago now, and I do a little bit of teaching still for Gotham writers in New York. I used to teach for Columbia College Chicago, but no longer. So I hope that gives you at least a good scenario of where I am, where I've been, maybe where I'm going.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dive into what I am seeing as a overlap in your career, and that would be very broadly media, content creation, content development, and journalism.
Yeah.
Maybe before you start getting into the creative writing thing, what do you see as exemplifying that overlap between your radio career and your writing career, perhaps as a journalist, but maybe not even that aspect, just the skills it takes to participate in those things and to be productive. And, you said you're a fast writer.
Yeah, it's a good question because it wasn't too long ago that I tried to, maybe it was for an interview or maybe it was for a published interview. I don't remember what it was for, but I was asked a similar question a few years ago about that. And I think what it comes down to is that I have always been a storyteller. And every medium that you can think of, maybe I've been a part of it. I've I've written songs. I've played music. That's a form of storytelling. I've told news stories. That's a form of storytelling. I did theater many, many years ago. That's a form of storytelling. I did a very little bit of television, but that was a form of storytelling. Radio journalism is a form of storytelling. So it's really about telling stories. So I think, if at the end of the day, if somebody gave me a title, my title would be storyteller, because that kind of overlaps everything that I've done. And I have to say, both of my parents gave me a little bit of the genes for that. My father was an Irish heritage, and whether you want to be cliche or not, but the Irish certainly have a way of telling stories. And as one of my friends says, it's in the tea. And my dad was a great storyteller. He was a great joke teller, just a great storyteller. My mother was a voracious reader. So I think those kind of genes kind of melded together a little bit for me. So to answer your question, really, I think it's just the storytelling aspect. I love telling stories, whether they be fictional, non-fictional, whether they be in poetry form, lyrical form. I just love that aspect of the really the human spirit. Part of our human nature, human condition is to tell each other stories, and I think that's probably what I do best, and what I do most, and what I do most prolifically in terms of like different media. So I hope that answers your question. I think it did.
Yeah, very cool. We kind of share that varied background of music and writing and audio, some video stuff. I'm across the board in the same way. Photography and what have you not, periodical work, and, trying to find how to convert the stories, the information in between all kinds of different formats. That's really kind of at the heart, I think, of a lot of people in media.
Yeah, I think that's true. Especially today, because I think you have to be versed in a lot of different. Back in the day, if you were a newspaper journalist, you were a newspaper journalist, and that's all you did. Today, you've got to be, I think, versed in a lot of different things, because of the way we consume media now, way we consume content.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you? I don't know how attentive you are to the landscape, but have you paid attention to how social media and social networking has changed journalism, or changed how you reach an audience, or anything along those lines? I'm just kind of curious, because you've been at it for a while.
Well, I've used social media for a long time. And I have to say, I have a love-hate relationship with it. There's a part of me that thinks it's fantastic and it's helpful, and especially as a journalist, you can connect with people who are your people you may be wanting to interview, or even people who come out of are witnesses to something. They can connect very easily, and that's worked very well for me. But in terms of my writing, I find it to be almost essential in today's work, to be an author or a storyteller in any way, because it's a way to connect magnificently, really, in a lot of ways, with an audience. I'd say about a year ago, I reluctantly went onto TikTok, but the reason I went onto TikTok is I'd heard of many of my author friends who have used it and have found a really vibrant audience there in terms of readers and people who love literature, and I was highly surprised at how strong the book reading uh, uh, community is on TikTok. So I've spent a little time there. I still spend a little time there, and I try to post on a regular basis. I think that's important, not only for the marketing, but just to there's a landscape out there that's full of content, and you've got to find a way to break through. And yes, you can get lost in the social media jungle too, but I think if you can tell stories behind the stories in a way, if you can open up a different side of you on social media that allows people to feel more connected to you as a storyteller in the broad sense of that word, I think that's great. And that has changed dramatically over the last, 15, 20 years in terms of how it's used, why you use it, best practices, all those kinds of things. So I embrace social media. I think it's important to what I do. Um, but I also know that you can get really caught up in it and it can draw, it almost becomes the catalyst to everything. And that I don't want to have happen. I don't want that to become, sort of like the only thing I worry about. But it is a tool. And for the most part, it's a good tool.
Yeah, I find the same thing. Great way to connect with readers or ideas, but at the same time, it can become a massive time sink.
Oh, yeah.
And you got to get stuff out. You taught in college. The adage there is publish or perish. But I think the speed of social media and social networks has kind of brought that same line of thinking to all media in a really broad sense. That you don't want to be late to the conversation, and also you need to make sure that you're promoting there early. What are some of your favorite platforms? I see you're on Instagram, you're on TikTok. Do you use Facebook? Whatever else?
Well, I have two Facebook accounts. One is for family and friends. It's really not a public place. But my other Facebook page, David Berner, David W. Berner, writer, is open to everybody. It's public, and I use it regularly. I mean, I would say I probably use Instagram more often than anything else, but I have been relatively active over the last 8, 9 months on TikTok, even though I was reluctant. But I did find a wonderful, supportive literary community on there, which surprised me a little bit, but I was happy to find that. All that was good. And I would say, do I have a favorite social media? I don't know if I have a favorite, but I would say I probably lean toward Instagram more than I do anything else.
Sure.
That's where I think I probably posted the most, but it's probably not that much more than Facebook or TikTok. And sometimes I'll post similar things on, all three of the platforms. Because I find that the audiences, the sort of users of each one of those platforms is slightly different. Their sort of demographic and socio economic backgrounds and everything are all said to be slightly different, homogenized in somewhat, but slightly different.
Yeah. I guess the unifying factor is you and them being interested in your work. But kind of going back to what we were talking about before, and the idea of making media that translates across all kinds of different channels and
Right.
Types, it sort of holds that same line of thinking for something like Instagram, where, traditionally it was pictures, it's more video now. Facebook, again, started with more words and blurbs, kind of got into pictures, started to get into video, where you have TikTok now is really about short form video. And, some of the other platforms are adopting that, but it really, I would say, in the same way that Snapchat did, put that kind of like up front and made it its primary feature out of the gate.
Yep. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I think, I don't know how many times, best practices will tell you if you can get a photograph that's moving, a video on any of those platforms, they're more likely to be spotted or paid attention to. It's probably just the human condition, where we the dog barks at the running jogger or the guy on a bike more than he does if somebody's standing still. So I just think that that's part of what we do. So I try to do that. I try to post things where I might be talking about something I'm working on, or if I'm
barking at a cyclist passing by, anything.
Yeah. We had the galleys for my poetry collection arrive the other day, so I was going through those, and I just did a little video about that process. So those kinds of things. And I try to do stuff that wouldn't be normally offered or available to a reader to show them kind of behind the scenes stuff. You've got to give them some kind of value to coming to those social media sites. So I just try to do it a little differently. I don't know if that's a little differently, but that's kind of the best practice to me.
Let's hear about influences. Now, you've worked in fiction and nonfiction. So, we think about maybe some of the folks going way back, Orwell worked in fiction and nonfiction. Hemingway worked in fiction and nonfiction. Hunter Thompson worked in fiction and nonfiction. Who were some of the people that influenced you? Doesn't necessarily have to be anybody that worked in both of those sides of writing, but it could be radio personalities, media personalities, writers, for whatever works that you're interested in drawing a line to.
I think that there's a lot of people who have influenced me or made me at least think about some way of storytelling or maybe a particular mood or something like that. There's a lot of people. And I would probably start because my first love really was music when I was a teenager. And there's no question in my mind that the lyricists of that era when I was growing up, so the Bob Dylans, the Joni Mitchells, those people have made an impact on me and still do to this day. And if there are musicians now that are influencing me, I would say Jason Isbell is one. It's the people who tend to be Iron and Wine, Sam Beam, people who are more lyrically oriented. The lyrics mean a lot. I heard brand new song from Brandy Carlisle the other day that just blew me away. I mean, it was absolutely a stunning piece of work. And it was mostly about the lyrics. So those things have influenced me, and they still do to this day. Writers, I'm kind of all over the place with a lot of that. I mean, my writing tends to be, it comes from, a basis of broadcast style, I think, which is sort of like simple and direct. And that's very much a Hemingway thing. But I also, so there's some influence there. I think there's also influence from people like Kerouac, pushing the boundaries a little bit or playing with language a little more. Maybe there's a little bit of that in there. One of my absolutely favorite artists of all time and across different platforms is Patti Smith. She's a poet, she's a musician, she's a world-renowned author. The memoir Just Kids is magnificent. I find her to be an artist, and I respect that. I really do. So it's hard to say, oh, this is my artistic muse. One or two people. There's a lot of them. I'm looking at a bookshelf right in front of me right now, and I see a book from Sam Shepard, and one from a Norwegian writer who I love, Per Pedersen. Fantastic writers. And so I get a little bit from all of them.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the critical thing when you're trying to be creative, when you're trying to dial into the muse, is to say, yes, I have these things that speak to me, but also these messages that I want to deliver. I have to find the best ways of expressing them and packaging them. Sometimes it is through a song. Sometimes it's through an image. Sometimes it's through words, whether they are prose or poetic. And it's all right to mix those things together. We're, like I said before, we're in a very similar boat. I've done a handful of book projects and video fiction and nonfiction, and made music for some of this stuff. And I would be as pressed as you are to dial in on influences. I would say I would have to be like, this project was influenced by X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I couldn't speak across the board and say all of my work was influenced by one writer or another.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It depends on the project or the particular thing I'm working on, I think. But I can get influences from everywhere. I can hear a lyric from a song from an artist I don't know, and I'd be like, shattered by it, and somehow will find a way to incorporate whatever that feeling is or that emotion that was brought forth from that into my work somehow. I mean, I've had reviewers, at least my publishing work, uh, have called me contemplative, um, uh, poetic prose, things of that sort. So I'm not a flashbang kind of guy. I'm not a mystery writer. I'm not a suspense writer. That's not what I do. I have had people say to me, "You should write a really good, you know, mystery novel." And I said, "I can't write a mystery novel. I would be terrible at it. It's just not my. It's not my. It's not what I do. You know." But what I do, I think I do pretty well. So I'm going to try to stay in my lane a little bit in terms of that. But I broke out of the lane a little bit when I started writing poetry, and I got some pieces published, and then the poetry book came about. So, I will continue to stretch, but I also know what I do well and what I don't do well. So I'm very aware of that.
Let's talk about your catalog. Maybe back catalog first before we get into the poetry book. What has been surprisingly successful, or maybe what has been personal favorites of yours to work on, or surprises that you discovered you really enjoyed, and maybe at the beginning of it was just like an idea, and then all of a sudden it kind of cascaded into something that you became really passionate about.
Yeah, well, I never expected to write my first book. I didn't plan to write a book about my experience. My first book is a memoir. I took some time off between my between my broadcast journalism career and going to full-time work at the college. And I taught at a high school in outside of Chicago, kind of a depressed area. I don't want to call the high school in any way a dangerous place, but it was a troubled school. And I taught there for a year. And when I would come home and I would tell my kids about experiences I had, they asked me, "Dad, are you writing this down?" And I was embarrassed to say that I wasn't. So I went back and I started to kind of kept notes, and it became my first book. And at the time that I was doing that, I was in love with that book. I was in love with the writing of it. I was in love with shaping it and finding the best way to tell it. But then the next book came and I fell in love with that book. So, to answer your question about a favorite, it's the one I'm writing at the moment. It's the one I'm pushing at the moment. It's the one I'm with at the time. It's sort of like love the one you're with. It's I like all of my work. I think all my work has merit, but I fall in love with the one that I'm working on. So there's that. The first piece of fiction that I wrote in terms of a full-length manuscript, I kind of wrote it backward, meaning I knew exactly what the ending was going to be. I had a picture in my head of what I wanted the ending to be, and I kind of thought about how am I going to get there. I don't use outlines. I'm a seat of the pants guy. I think the story is already there in many ways. You just got to dig through the dirt and the mess to find it, and that's kind of what I do. And sometimes when I'm writing, I surprise myself about where it's going, and that's kind of fun. That's sort of the beauty of it in a lot of ways. And it's the antithesis of journalism, because you're working with facts and you're working with, a particular way that you want to say something in a particular style. But when you're writing either memoir or fiction, you can pick and choose what you want to focus on. So yeah, I have a fair amount of books, and I'm over a dozen now. Some of them are memoirs, some of them are fiction, some of them I've had a couple novellas. The Islander is probably one that's been awarded the most, or at least acknowledged the most. Interesting project by this publisher, Outpost 19 in San Francisco, a smaller publisher that started this initiative called the Shortish Project. And they were only going to work with novellas for this particular imprint, which is highly unusual in the publishing world right now, because most publishers shun novellas because they think nobody wants to read something that's only 150 pages and spend $15. Well, that may be true, but we are becoming shorter and shorter with our attention spans, and I don't see why people wouldn't love short books. So that never made any sense to me. But my that is a novella which I really love that book, and I think that book has gotten a lot of praise. So there's that. I have I have some other fiction that's typical length fiction, 75,000 words kind of thing. Um, but picking a favorite is a tough one. It's usually the one I'm working on at the moment, and I don't know where ideas come from in terms of fiction. I think sometimes I've read a news story and it sparked something. It made me think about something in a different way. Um, you know, one of my memoirs, is about 3 days. It's about 3 days in time. So, I've taken different approaches. I think if you read all my work, though, it would have a similar thread, meaning it's probably, contemplative. There's a lot of father-son relationship stories throughout my work. Yeah, a lot of family oriented things. I want to say I've not written a family epic saga kind of thing. That's probably not me. But the connection between the human condition between fathers and sons, families, I would say is a pretty strong theme in all of this stuff. Even in the poetry collection, nature is a big deal in a lot of this stuff. The artistic process is a big part of it. Um, but it's not like a Scott Turow who writes basically everything out of the courtroom, right? I don't have that kind of my stuff is a little all over the place, um, but it has the similarity of sort of my contemplative style. I think that's what kind of links them all together. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's turn to Garden Tools, the poetry collection you are releasing this fall.
Yes.
I think it's going to come out a little after this episode goes live, but where did it start? Was there a kind of topical theme? You've titled it Garden Tools. You mentioned liking nature. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I occasionally had written a poem here or there, and sometimes I did it only to just like stretch the writing muscles. It wasn't meant to be published. I have a couple of typewriters in my little writing shed, and I use those sometimes to type poems. My poems tend to be relatively short. And it just was an exercise. It was kind of a meditative exercise, a meditative writing exercise. And then long story short, I had a couple published. And I kept thinking, well, maybe I should play around with this a little bit more. So I did, and I tried to write a poem a day for a while. A lot of it was garbage, but some of it was, not bad. And I started keeping a collection and pulling it together. And then I started thinking, oh, well, maybe there's something to this. So I reached out to a couple of friends of mine who are poets, very good ones. And I had them, hey, look at this manuscript and tell me whether you think this is, worthy of anything. And they were very helpful. They were very encouraging. A couple of notes here or there was very helpful for me, but I felt like I had something. And so I thought, well, maybe it is time to try this. So I began to shop it out there. I used to have an agent. I don't have an agent anymore. I have found in today's world, if you're trying to write commercial fiction, that's probably a good idea to have an agent. But if you're writing literary fiction or poetry or something of that sort, agents they don't do you a whole hell of a lot of good. I'll be very honest with you, because they're not connected to the publishers that want that kind of work. They're connected to the commercial publishers because they want to make their money. I understand. So I was the one who, went out to the publishers and started shopping it around, got a publisher, and they seemed to like it. Finishing Line Press is a well-known poetry publisher. It's a medium-sized publishing company. They tend to be very supportive, and they do nothing but poetry. which is a hard sell in itself sometimes.
Right.
But I felt like I had something. And so, you mentioned about the theme of it, that sort of thing. Well, the name came from something my wife, who's a very avid gardener and a very good one, um, she said, you got to have the garden tools to create your garden. And I thought, well, that's a metaphor. You know, your garden is your life. The tools that you need to make a beautiful life, and that's kind of where it came from. So if there's a thread through the work, it's in three sections: landscape, love, and longing. And each one of those sections has poems that are kind of linked to those phrases, but it's really about tending to your life, tending to the garden that you're living. Um, and that's kind of the theme. So there are poems in this collection that are about nature, that are about uh, gardens, that are about family, that are about dogs, that are about landscapes. It's just about being present in the world and making the best of your garden, in terms of your life, and that's kind of what the theme is through this. And I really I didn't know what that was until I started playing around with all the poems that I had, and I started finding a sort of thread that was there. I didn't pick a thread and then try to work poems into that thread. The thread came out of the poems. Um, so there's 50 some poems in there, and most of them are fairly short, maybe 4 stanzas at best, 5 stanzas. One is a little bit longer. And I'm it's a journey that I went on to do this, and I kind of surprised myself. I didn't know that I would be able to make this work. And I've gotten a lot of praise for them. I had some other uh, poems published since then, and I'm working on a second collection right now. So that's going to be a while, but um, yeah, it's been a great exercise, not only for me, but just that sort of literary exercise to sort of play with words and think of things a little differently. So it's been a lot of fun.
You have another book slated for release next year, American Moon. I assume that it is still maybe a little in progress. Maybe you're in editing or anything like that. Um, just briefly, what should people expect from that novella?
Yeah, so we just finished up the editing with my editor at Regal House Publishing. I'm looking for probably in the next couple of months, maybe get a cover design that'll be sent, and then we go into some marketing issues. So the book is called American Moon. It's a novella. Again, I'm lucky enough to get a novella published. Um, it won the prize from the publishing house for literary novellas, which I was pleased with. And with that prize came the publication. So I'm happy to be. Regal House is wonderful. They're sharp and attentive and supportive and well organized. They're very helpful. So the story, it's called American Moon because it's about sort of the rise and the fall in a lot of ways. So you know the um, the moon set and the moon rise of sort of the American dream. It's like, and it's based off a story of a young man who is traveling across the country and stays overnight in a motel, kind of a roadside motel, and long story short, discovers a infant in the room next to him alone, crying. And from there, he discovers the mother and he discovers her issues, of which she has many. And they both kind of set off in a way together to sort of see if the American dream is still out there, um, both carrying their own demons in a way. So it's a bit of a road trip story. It's a bit of a story about modern day America, the rise of Donald Trump, the rise of the opioid crisis, the rise of poverty. Is the American dream still alive? But it's told through the story of these two people, and their want to find something that that is good for them, good for their lives. What they would consider their American dream. So that's the story. And I'm not sure. The only way this book came about was I had this idea. I read about a story, or read a news story many years ago about someone who had found an infant, like on the doorstep or something. And it just struck me. It's like, well, what do you do when that happens? And how do you live with that? How does that sit with you? How does that affect you? And I started playing around with it, and the story came to life, and it just really came out. I mean, it's just like, wow, it's just all there. Just a matter of sitting in front of the keyboard and getting it out. So that's what that story's about, and I'm really looking forward to this book coming out. Like I said, I'm in love with the one that I'm currently working on. It's kind of like that, but yeah, it's publishing sometimes is a long process. I mean, I won that award from them a year and a half ago, so we're really just getting into the publishing of the works of the publishing now. So it takes some time, but
Right.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Are there any final thoughts that you have, or things that you haven't said that you feel that need to be said about your work, your career, your books?
First of all, I would say anybody who, because I work with students all the time, I work with young writers and older writers who are trying to write something. If you are in a creative world, and I'm a big believer in the music producer Rick Rubin's words about just create for yourself, do it for you. If there's an audience there, or if somebody's going to like it, you're going to connect more with that audience if you do something for you. Consider the human spirit, consider the human condition, but as a creator, make sure you do it for you first. I don't write for an audience. I don't write to an audience. I know some people do, and that's fine if that's how they want to work. But I write a story that I want to read, and then I just hope that others do too. So if you're a creator and you're out there and you're trying to write to an audience, stop. Start writing for yourself, whether it be lyrics, music, poetry, whatever it is. Do it for you first, and you'll find an audience. So I think that's important. But in terms of me, I said the other day to a friend, I said, I think I might be near the end of my long manuscripts. I don't know if I'm going to be writing much more novels. And he just looked at me and laughed. And he said, come on, man, you've been writing so long and for so much. There's more stories there. Or maybe that's true. So every time that I thought that this is my last book, or my last hurrah, or my last try, something else comes along. So, I would say that to myself, and I would say that to others. Find the time to be creative. We all have a creative streak in us. We all have something to say. And I don't mean to sound, sentimental or sort of, new agey about this. I truly believe that. We all have stories. We all have creative aspects of our lives. It's part of the human condition. So massage it, use that muscle, and don't let anybody tell you any different.
Well, hey, David, I appreciate you taking the time to talk today.
This is great. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it too.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk again before too long.